Hello friends! On the weekend, the Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, Syrskyi, stated that the army of Russia has activated offensive operations effectively along the entire front and is conducting a regrouping of troops. According to him, the Pokrovsk direction is currently the most tense, where the Russians have concentrated about 106,000 personnel. In the 7th Rapid Reaction Corps of the Air Assault Forces of Ukraine, it was also reported that Russian troops are strengthening their grouping in the Pokrovsk direction and accumulating forces for a further offensive. According to the Ukrainian military, the presence of the 90th Tank Division of Russia is recorded in Pokrovsk. The city, as claimed, is used for the concentration of personnel and equipment. Ukrainian forces struck part of the Russian artillery directly in Pokrovsk. It is also reported that in Myrnohrad, Russian troops are deploying command posts and trying to use the city as a bridgehead for advancing toward Rodynske. The Ukrainian military calls Hryshyne the main objective of the offensive. Small arms battles continue there, and Russian infantry is trying both to consolidate in the village itself and to bypass it through open areas of terrain in the direction of Vasilievka. Ukrainian military serviceman with the call sign Muchny reports today that the situation on the Pokrovsk section of the front remains maximally dynamic and tense. The enemy continues to accumulate personnel south of Hryshyne, while simultaneously trying to seep through the forest belts along the E50 highway toward Syrskyi. The vector of movement of the Russians here is already clearly readable. They are trying to gradually expand control over the flanks to create conditions for further pressure on the western and northwestern part of this area. The next stage for the enemy, apparently, is an attempt to consolidate in Vasilievka and Myrne. This will allow them to expand their presence in the sector and gradually pull closer to the Shevchenko district. If they manage to properly saturate these areas with infantry, FPV crews and logistics, then they may begin to systematically press on neighboring settlements not only frontally but also through a flank envelopment. Meanwhile, footage is appearing of our aviation's active work on multi-story buildings in Rodynske, where the enemy regularly accumulates personnel and sets up temporary basing points. Such strikes are critically important now because the Russians are increasingly using urban buildings as cover for infantry, drone operators and control nodes. Effectively, multi-story buildings are turning into concrete fortifications in the middle of the city for them. At the same time, the enemy's advance towards the Zaporizhzhia mine is observed, where our forces are still maintaining control. But the situation there is becoming more difficult. If the enemy begins to systematically dismantle the mine area with aviation before assault operations, as has been done repeatedly in other sectors of the front, then holding the defense will become significantly harder. After massive strikes with guided aerial bombs or aviation missiles, even well-prepared positions often turn into ruins unsuitable for normal holding. For the enemy, it is critically important now to squeeze the mine area because after that, more convenient opportunities open up for enveloping the Shevchenko-Svitla direction. In perspective, this also creates a threat to Bilitske, no longer just from the front, but also from the rear or semi-flank directions. That is why the enemy is now so actively trying to push through this sector. They want to gradually form a bridgehead for further expansion of the offensive and complicate our forces' holding of the entire sector outside of Pokrovsk, reports Muchny. only 28% of Ukrainians see Zelenskyy as president after the war, according to the results of a survey by the Kyiv International Institute of Sociology conducted at the end of April. At the same time, 16% want him to remain in politics, but in another role as a deputy or party leader. 30% want him to leave politics, and 15% want him to be tried. Notably, the most supporters of criminal prosecution of the current president of Ukraine are among Kyiv residents, 25%. Among Kyiv residents, there are also the fewest of those who see him as head of state after the war, 22%. The most of those who want Zelenskyy to remain president are in the Dnipropetrovsk and Zaporizhia regions, 37%. I will remind you, in 2019, 73% of Ukrainians voted for Zelenskyy. Here, friends, you must understand that the data of sociological research during the war should be treated with a good deal of skepticism, as people are far from always ready, given the situation, to openly express their real position to sociologists, especially on controversial political issues such as Zelenskyy himself or the acceptability of certain conditions for ending the war. By the way, political scientist Volodymyr Fesenko also writes about this. According to him, only about 10% of respondents answer the questions of sociologists in Ukraine, which calls into question the accuracy of the survey results. Commenting on the data of one of the sources studies, Fesenko says that the methodology indicated that the response rate was slightly more than 10%. That is, out of approximately 10,000 people who were approached, only about 1,000 agreed to answer, while about 90% refused. Such a situation, he notes, significantly weakens the validity of the data and confirms a systemic problem for all sociological companies. Sociologists themselves call this phenomenon the spiral of silence. This is when people hide their views if they consider them unpopular. In our case, such hiding of one's views manifests itself simply in a refusal to participate in sociological surveys, notes Fesenko. Friends, this channel is my only source of income, but lately I've been making practically nothing from it. If you could support me financially, I would be very grateful. Thank you very much and see you in the next video.